Dream Children, a Reverie by Charles Lamb. Children love to listen to stories about their elders when they were children, to stretch their imagination to the conception of a traditionary great uncle or grandame whom they never saw. It was in this spirit that my little ones crept about me the other evening to hear about their great grandmother Field, who lived in a great house in Norfolk, 1,000 times bigger than that in which they and Papa lived, which had been the scene, so at least it was generally believed in that part of the country, of the tragic incidents which they had lately become familiar with from the ballad of the children in the wood. Certain it is that the whole story of the children and their cruel uncle was to be seen fairly carved in wood upon the chimney piece of the great hall, the whole story down to the robin redbreast, till a foolish rich person pulled it down to set up a marble, one of modern invention, in its stead, with no story upon it. Here Alice put out one of her dear mother's looks, too tender to be called upbraiding. Then I went on to say how religious and how good their great grandmother Field was, how beloved and respected by everyone, though she was not indeed the mistress of this great house, but had only the charge of it, and yet in some respect she might be said to be the mistress of it too, committed to her by the owner, who preferred living in a newer and more fashionable mansion which he had purchased somewhere in the adjoining country. But still she lived in it in a manner as if it had been her own, and kept up the dignity of the great house in a sort of while she lived, which afterwards came to decay and was nearly pulled down, and all its old ornaments stripped and carried away to the owner's other house, where they were set up and looked as awkward as if some one were to carry away the old tombs they had seen lately at the Abbey, and stick them up in Lady C's tawdry gilt drawing room. Here John smiled, as much as to say, that would be foolish indeed. And then I told how, when she came to die, her funeral was attended by a concourse of all the poor, and some of the gentry too, of the neighbourhood for many miles round, to show their respect for her memory, because she had been such a good and religious woman, so good indeed that she knew all the psaltery by heart, and a great part of the Testament besides. Here little Alice spread her hands. Then I told what a tall, upright, graceful person their great-grandmother Field once was, and how in her youth she was esteemed the best dancer. Here Alice's little right foot played an involuntary movement, till upon my looks grave it deceived. The best dancer, I was saying, in the country, till a cruel disease called cancer came and bowed her down with pain. But it could never bend her good spirits or make them stoop, but they were still upright, because she was so good and religious. Then I told how she used to sleep by herself in a lone chamber of the great lone house, and how she believed that the apparition of 2 infants was to be seen at midnight gliding up and down the great staircase near where she slept. But she said those innocent would do her no harm, and how frightened I used to be, though in those days I had my maid to sleep with me, because I was never half so good or religious as she. And yet I never saw the infants. Here John expanded all his eyebrows and tried to look courageous. Then I told how good she was to all her grandchildren, having us to the great house in holidays, where I in particular used to spend many hours by myself in gazing upon the old busts of 12 Caesars that had been emperors of Rome, till the old marble heads would seem to live again, or I to be turned into marble with them. How I never could be tired with roaming around the huge mansion, with its vast empty rooms, with their worn-out hangings, fluttering tapestries, and carved oaken panels, with the gliding almost rubbed out sometimes in the spacious old fashioned gardens, which I had almost to myself, unless when now and then a solitary gardening man would cross me, and how the nectarines and peaches hung upon the wall without my ever offering to pluck them, because they were forbidden fruits, unless now and then, and because I had more pleasure in strolling about the fair apple, which were good for nothing but to look at, or in lying about upon the fresh grass, with all the fine garden smells around me, or basting in the orangeries till I could almost fancy myself ripening too, along with the oranges and the lime, in that great warmth, or in watching the days that darting to and forth in the fish pond at the bottom of the garden, and here and there a great sulky pike hanging midway down the water in silent state, as if it mocked their impertinent friskings. I had more pleasure in this busy idle diversion than in all sweet flavors of peaches, nectarines, oranges, and such like common baits of children. Here Jones lay deposited back upon the plate of bunch of grapes, which not unobserved by Alice, he had meditated dividing with her, and both seemed willing to relinquish them for the present as irrelevant. Then, in somewhat a more heightened tone, I told how, though their great grandmother felt thou all her grandchildren, yet in an especial manner she might said to love their Uncle John L., because he was so handsome and spirited a youth, and a king to the rest of us, and instead of mopping about in solitary corners like some of us, he would mount the most mettlesome horse he could get, when buttonemed no bigger than themselves, and make it carry him half over the country in morning, and join the hunters when there were any out. And yet he loved the old great house and gardens too, but had too much spirit to be always pent up within their boundaries. And how their uncle grew up to man's estate as brave as he was handsome, to the admiration of everybody, but of their great grandmother Field most especially, and how he used to carry me upon his back when I was a lame-footed boy, for he was a good bit older than me, many a mile when I could not walk for pain, and how in after life he became lame-footed too, and I did not always, I fear, make allowance enough for him when he was impatient and in pain. Nor I remember sufficiently how considerate he had been to me when I was lame-footed, and how he died, though he had not been dead an hour. It seemed as if he had died a great while ago. Such a distance there is betwixt life and death, and how I bore his death, as I thought pretty well at first, but afterward it haunted and haunted me, and though I did not cry or take it to heart as some do, and as I think he would have done if I had died, yet I missed him all day long, and knew not till then how much I had loved him. I missed him. I missed his kindness, and missed his crossness, and wished him to be alive again, to be quarrelling with him, so we quarrel sometimes, rather than not have him again, and was as uneasy without him as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. Here the children fell a crying, and asked if their little mourning which they had on was not for Uncle John. And they looked up and prayed me not to go on about their uncle, but to tell them some stories about their pretty dead mother. Then I told them how for 7 long years, in hope, sometimes in despair, yet persisting ever, I courted the fair Alice W.N., and as much as children could understand, I explained to them what coyness and difficulty and denial meant in maidens, when suddenly turning to Alice, the soul of the first Alice looked out at her eyes with such reality of representment that I became in doubt which of them stood there before me, or whose that bright hair was, and while I stood gazing, both the children gradually grew fainter to my view, descending and still descending, till nothing at last but two mournful features were seen in the uttermost distance, which, without speech, strangely impressed upon me the effects of speech. We are not of Alice, nor of thee, nor are we children at all, the children of Alice call Bartram father. We are nothing less than nothing, and dreams. We are only what might have been, and must wait upon the tedious shore of Lethe millions of age before we have existence and a name. And immediately awaking, I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair, where I had fallen asleep, with the faithful Bridget unchanging by my side. But John L. or James Elia was gone forever.